My brother-in-law planned Christmas with the whole family at my house without permission and broke in while I was traveling. My living room still looked a little traumatized from the last big Christmas my husband's family crashed at our place. That was last December, the year before everything blew up, and I still had the marks to prove it. The fake tree we had shoved into the corner had left little plastic needles embedded in the rug. There were faint drink rings on the coffee table where someone ignored a coaster next to a Christmas candle, and one of the hooks on the curtain rod was still bent from when my brother-in-law decided to hang extra lights for the vibe. It should have been my clue to never do it again. But of course I told myself I was being dramatic and that the dents in the coffee table and the faint stain on the rug were just normal signs of family life. The truth is, nothing about the way my husband's family does Christmas feels normal to me, and I say that as someone who grew up sharing one bathroom with 3 siblings and a very loud television in the background every night. What happens with his side of the family is a whole different category of chaos. The kind that leaves you washing dishes at 2 in the morning while people you barely know are still pouring drinks in your kitchen like they own the place. My name is Angela, and I live with my husband in a small house outside a big city in the United States. The kind of neighborhood where people complain about the garbage schedule and obsess over lawn edges. From the outside, our life looks boring in a comfortable way. I work as an office assistant at a small insurance agency, which basically means I spend my days answering phones, soothing angry people who think their bills are wrong, and reminding my boss where he left his coffee. My husband works in maintenance for an apartment complex across town, so his phone is always buzzing with somebody's clogged sink emergency. We are not glamorous people. We go to work, we come home. We argue about who is taking the trash out. And for a while, that was enough for me. I was fine with simple. I was not fine with being turned into unpaid staff every time his family decided our house was the perfect backdrop for their yearly drama. When we first bought this place, everyone acted like we had just volunteered to be the official Christmas hosts forever. I did not sign up for that. The first year we hosted, it was kind of sweet in a chaotic way. I made way too much food. My mother-in-law cried about how proud she was of her boys, and my father-in-law fell asleep in the recliner with a plate on his lap. There was food everywhere, but people helped clean up, and I thought, okay, this is messy, but it is fine. The second year is when it turned into something else. By then, my husband's brother had decided that he was basically the director of Christmas, like some self-appointed event planner who never actually lifts a finger for anything except giving orders and making comments that sound like jokes, but land like insults. Last year, I spent the whole day cooking. I am not exaggerating. I woke up before the sun because I had to get the main dish in the oven, prep sides, bake dessert, and try to make our very normal little house look like a magazine spread so nobody would say it looked bare again like they did the year before. People started arriving early, which meant they were already in the kitchen while I was still in sweatpants with flour on my face. My brother-in-law walked in like he was inspecting a venue, clapped his hands together, and started telling people where to put the chairs, which wall the folding table should go against, and how we should really think about knocking this wall out one day, like he was paying the mortgage. I laughed it off then, but I remember feeling my jaw clench. The worst part of last year was the food. Not because it turned out bad, but because of the commentary. I made the main dish myself, followed the recipe, did everything I was supposed to. I burned my wrist on the oven rack. My back hurt from standing for hours. And by the time I brought the big dish out, my shirt was sticking to me from the heat and stress. Everyone was gathered around the table. And when I set the dish down, they actually clapped. For like 2 seconds, I felt seen. Then my brother-in-law leaned back in his chair, took one dramatic sniff, and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, that next year we should just order from a restaurant because then at least the food would be consistent. The room laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that felt like a slap. I stood there holding the serving spoon, smiling with my face and not with my body, while something in my chest quietly snapped. Nobody said anything. Not my husband, not my in-laws, nobody. My husband looked down at his plate like it was suddenly very interesting. I served everyone anyway. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I was up to my elbows in greasy water, scraping someone else's dried gravy off my good pan, while my husband snored on the couch. I remember thinking, I am never doing this again. I remember thinking it very clearly, like a promise I was making to myself in the middle of the dirty dishes and the sticky floor. Fast forward almost a year, and our living room still had a couple of faint reminders of that night, like the small scratch on the coffee table where someone dragged a chair, and the slightly darker patch on the rug that no cleaner could fully fix. Every time I looked at those things, I felt a tiny spike of anger, but I also felt guilty for feeling angry, which is exactly how this family stuff always works. You get hurt, Then you feel bad for feeling hurt. Then you end up doing the thing again because you do not want to be the difficult one. That fall, when stores started putting out Christmas decorations way too early, my stomach twisted every time I walked past a display. I did not want to host. I did not want to cook for 30 people who would treat our house like some community center. I wanted quiet. I wanted to sit somewhere that did not belong to me, drink something warm, and let someone else wash the dishes. So one night in early fall, I brought it up to my husband while we were eating leftover takeout on the couch. I told him I could not do another year like the last one. I told him I still remembered standing in our kitchen at 2 a.m. the year before, scraping stuffing off a pan with my back aching, while his brother posted photos from my table and called it our perfect Christmas on some social media app, as if he had done anything but criticize and drink. My husband looked tired before I even finished talking. He rubbed his eyes and said he understood, but he also reminded me how much his father lived for those gatherings now that he was older and had some health issues. I know about the health issues. I went with them to the hospital once when his father had a scare with his heart. I am not cold, I care. But caring about someone's health does not mean handing them a key to your sanity and saying, "Go ahead, do whatever you want." I kept talking. I reminded my husband of the way his brother had spoken to me last year, how he had pointed his fork at the dish I made and joked about ordering real food next time, how he had waved me off when I tried to sit for 5 minutes, telling me the trash was overflowing and the hostess should probably handle that. My husband winced when I repeated those lines, like hearing them out loud made them worse. He apologized again for not speaking up back then. He promised he would not let that happen again. I told him the only way to guarantee that was to not host at all. We ended up sitting there with the empty containers between us, going back and forth. He was worried about being the one to break tradition, and how his father would take it. I was worried about breaking myself trying to keep everyone comfortable except me. Eventually, after a lot of sighing and that quiet staring he does when he is trying to process something, he admitted he agreed with me. He said he did not want to spend another Christmas watching me run around while his brother treated our house like some event space he rented. That is when the idea of getting away came up, not as a joke, but as an actual plan. We started looking at places on my phone that same night. Nothing fancy, just a resort on the coast within a short flight. Someplace with a pool and a decent breakfast and no relatives. We found one that was not insanely expensive if we booked early and stayed in a smaller room. I remember how my shoulders dropped when we finally admitted out loud that this was the trip we wanted to take. It felt like releasing a breath I had been holding since last year. We picked dates that covered Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, leaving on December 23rd and not getting back until the day after Christmas. And my husband kept saying it felt strange but good, like we were choosing ourselves for once. We agreed we would tell his family in advance, clearly and directly, so there would be no surprises. That was the plan. Simple, responsible, adult. Of course, that is not how it happened. A couple of months before Christmas, on a chilly afternoon, I was outside pulling weeds out of the little strip of soil along our front walkway. The one I pretend is a garden, even though nothing survives there for long. I could hear the muffled sound of voices inside the house, but I did not think much of it at first. People call my husband a lot, usually about leaking pipes or broken heaters. Then I realized the voices were louder than normal and not coming from the phone. I wiped my hands on my leggings and went inside. My brother-in-law was standing in the middle of our living room like he owned it, arms crossed, voice raised. My husband stood a few feet away, shoulders tense, hands in his pockets. That look on his face he gets when he is already tired of an argument, but feels trapped in it. I walked in slowly and caught the tail end of my brother-in-law's sentence. He was saying something about how it is already settled and everybody is counting on it. And my stomach dropped because I knew exactly what it was. I asked what was going on, even though I could guess. My brother-in-law did not even give my husband a chance to answer. He turned to me like he had been waiting for his audience and announced that he had been taking care of things and had already told everyone that the Christmas would be at our house again, same as the last 2 years. He said it like he was doing us a favor, like organizing 30 people to show up at our front door with half-prepared dishes and high expectations was some generous gift he was giving us. I just stared at him for a second. I could feel dirt from the yard still under my fingernails, my hair pushed back messily, my heart beating faster. My husband tried to jump in and explain that we had already decided to travel this year, that we had booked a trip and everything. But my brother-in-law waved his hand like that was a minor detail. He said family was more important than a random vacation, and that our house was obviously the best option because it was big enough to handle everyone. It is not big enough, by the way. It just happens to be the only place anyone is willing to cram themselves into, because we have a decent couch. I told him as calmly as I could that we had talked about it, and we were not hosting this year. I said we already made plans and that we were sticking to them. He laughed. Actually laughed. Then he looked at my husband and said, "You are really going to let her do this to Mom and Dad?" Like I was a villain stealing something important instead of a tired woman who did not want strangers spilling drinks on her couch again. My husband shifted his weight but did not answer right away. And that made me even angrier, not just at his brother, but at him too. The argument went in circles. My brother-in-law kept saying things like, "The family needs this," and "You know Dad's health is not great. You cannot just leave them." I kept saying, "We have done it 2 years in a row," and "It is not our turn," and "Someone else can host. They all have kitchens too." He accused us of being selfish. I pointed out that he was demanding we do a huge amount of work while he did nothing but show up and make comments. He did not like that part. His voice got louder. He started pacing. My husband kept telling him it was not about abandoning anyone. It was about boundaries and how exhausted we had been after last year. My brother-in-law insisted that I was exaggerating, that everybody helps, which is hilarious because the only help I remember is one cousin rinsing a bowl while talking on their phone. Eventually, I snapped and asked him what exactly he had done so far for this event he claimed to be organizing. He hesitated for a second, then said he had talked to our parents and a couple of relatives, that he had started the group chat, as if sending messages was the same as buying groceries or scrubbing a pan. I told him directly that the answer was still no, that our house was not available for a party this year. I told him to let everyone know before they started making travel plans. He glared at me with this look that said he was not used to being told no, especially by me. Before he left, he dropped one more guilt trip about how our parents would feel abandoned if we did not host. Then he slammed the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. After he left, the house felt weirdly quiet, like it was holding its breath. My husband sat down heavily on the couch and put his face in his hands. I sat next to him and asked if he was okay. He admitted that he hated fighting with his brother, but that he hated even more the way things had been dumped on us last year. He said he understood why I was firm. He said he was proud of me for not backing down. It should have felt like a team moment, and in some ways it did. But there was this tiny knot of dread in my stomach that would not untie. 3 days later, that knot made sense. I was at work, half listening to someone complain about their premium, when my phone lit up on my desk with a message from my father-in-law. I glanced at it quickly between calls, expecting maybe a simple, "How are you?" Instead, it was this long message about how excited he was to see everyone at our place for Christmas, how my mother-in-law was already planning what dessert to bring, how he had told our cousins that Christmas at Angela's was back on like he was announcing a concert. He asked what time they should arrive, and if there was anything we needed them to pick up on the way. I felt my face get hot. My hands started shaking a little. I knew right away that my brother-in-law had ignored everything we said and just told everyone the event was happening here anyway. As soon as I had a break, I opened the family group chat on my phone. It was a nightmare. There were messages from aunts asking what they should cook, cousins talking about carpools, someone posting a blurry selfie of their packed suitcase with a caption about counting down to the big family tradition at Angela's place. There was even a post on a social media app where one cousin tagged our street and wrote something about, "See you all at the usual spot." My house was a usual spot now, apparently. I could feel my pulse in my ears. I started taking screenshots. Every message that mentioned our house, every little "cannot wait to invade your kitchen again," every comment about the classic event. I did it partly out of spite and partly because something inside me said, "You are going to need proof of this later." My husband called me on his break, and I told him about the messages, my voice low and tight. I could hear the disbelief and anger in his sigh. He said he would call his father that night and clear it up. I told him he also needed to talk to his brother again. And this time, no gentle hints. That evening, my husband called his father while I sat at the table pretending to scroll through recipes, but really listening to his side of the conversation. He explained slowly and carefully that we were not hosting this year, that we had told his brother that weeks ago, that we had already booked a trip. I could hear his father's voice through the phone, confused and then frustrated. His father asked why we did not tell them directly before, why we were changing our minds now that everyone was excited. My husband repeated that we had not changed our minds, that his brother had taken it on himself to promise our house without asking us. There was a long pause. Then my husband's face went tight. His father said something about how, Your brother only did what he had to do because you were not thinking about the family. My husband's shoulders slumped. Before he put his phone down, he also told his father very clearly not to use the spare key he still had for our place, and not to let anyone else in while we were gone. He even sent a short text afterward repeating it, just so there was no way to pretend he had not heard it. After he hung up, he told me his father had said he understood that we needed to take care of ourselves, but that he just wanted one more Christmas with everyone under the same roof, one more year where he could sit at our table and pretend nothing in his body hurt, just because his health was not what it used to be. I felt that familiar guilt try to climb back up my throat. I pictured him sitting in his living room, clutching his chest like he had during that health scare, and for a second I almost caved. Almost. Then I looked around at our small, worn living room, imagined it packed again with people who would leave their plates on the floor and their cups on the windowsill without even glancing at the trash can. And something in me hardened again. I reminded my husband of the way I had cried in the bathroom last year, quietly, so nobody would hear, because his brother had made a comment about how some people are not cut out for hosting, right as I dropped a spoon. I reminded him of how my feet had been swollen from standing all day, how my back hurt for days afterward, how nobody even noticed when I sat down with my own plate hours after everyone else. I told him that if we gave in again, this would never end. We would be the default hosts forever, because everyone knew we would fold under pressure. He rubbed his forehead and nodded. He said he knew I was right. He said he hated that I was right. We agreed again that the answer was still no. That is when I came up with what my husband called the petty plan, and what I still call protecting my own peace. I told him that since his brother had gone around telling everyone the event was at our house without our consent, we were not going to clean up his mess for him. We were not going to send a huge message to the whole family announcing that the event was canceled, just so his brother could swoop in and look like the hero who fixed it somewhere else. Instead, we would stick to our original plan, leave town, lock up the house, and let his brother deal with the consequences of his own lies when people realized there was no party at our place. My husband looked at me like he was not sure whether to be impressed or worried. Honestly, I was not sure either. But a big part of me felt a dark little thrill at the idea of his brother walking up to our house with a tray of food and finding the lights off and the door locked. We booked the resort officially the next day and paid the deposit. I made lists. I like lists. They make me feel like I have some control. I wrote down what we needed to pack, what time we had to leave for the airport, when to set the timers on the lights. I called our alarm company and made sure our code was updated. The account was still under my father-in-law's name from when he owned the house, and we had kept putting off the paperwork to change it, because the payment came out of his account automatically, and it felt like a whole project every time we thought about dealing with it. The account was technically still under my father-in-law's name from when he owned the place, but they added my current phone number as an additional contact. I texted our neighbor, the one who always notices everything on the street, and told her we would be out of town for a few days. I asked if she could keep an eye on the house and let us know if anything looked weird. She replied right away, said of course, and added a joke about how she would make sure nobody stole our garden gnome. I do not even have a garden gnome, but it made me smile. The week of the trip, everything felt oddly calm. Work was hectic, as usual, but having the trip on the calendar made it bearable. My husband and I packed our bags the night before, folded our clothes, argued lightly about how many pairs of shoes was reasonable for 4 nights. The morning of the flight, we woke up before dawn, moved around the house in that quiet way you do when you are trying not to think about what might go wrong. We triple-checked the locks, armed the alarm, left a note for the neighbor with our flight details just in case. When I stepped outside and looked back at our little house, I felt a mixture of relief and nerves. Relief because I knew I would not be scrubbing pans for 30 people this year. Nerves because I knew there would be fallout. The resort was exactly what we needed on paper. Warm air, big pool, soft beds, staff who smiled at you like you were a paying guest instead of someone they could order around. The first day, I let myself relax a little. We sat by the pool, ordered drinks, pretended we were just another couple on vacation without any family drama waiting at the end of it. My phone buzzed occasionally with group chat messages, but I turned it face down on the little table and told myself I would deal with it later. My husband did the same, even though I could tell he was thinking about it. Every time someone laughed nearby, I saw his jaw tighten slightly, like he was hearing his brother's voice. On Christmas Eve, December 24th, his phone started buzzing more. He finally checked it while we were having lunch at the little cafe by the pool. His face changed as he scrolled. He showed me the messages. His brother was sending increasingly frantic texts asking where we were, what time we would be home, why the alarm was on. My father-in-law had messaged too. saying his brother was confused and that they were already on the road. There were a couple of missed calls. For a minute, I felt that familiar wave of guilt rise again, but then I remembered all those screenshots of him announcing our house as the venue without ever asking us. I told my husband it was not our job to rescue his brother from the mess he had created. We decided together that we would not answer right away. That sounds harsh, I know. I can already hear people saying we should have been clearer, more direct. But here is the thing. We had been clear. Repeatedly. We had said no. We had explained our plans. His brother just did not like our answer, so he pretended it did not exist. At some point, if you keep trying to manage someone else's feelings, you end up disappearing yourself. I was done disappearing. On Christmas Day, December 25th, we tried to stick to our agreement of not checking our phones constantly. We went down to breakfast, walked along the water, pretended for a few hours that our biggest problem was whether to sit in the shade or in the sun. But I would be lying if I said the tension was not there, under the surface. Every time my phone buzzed in my bag, my stomach clenched. Around midday, my husband admitted he felt like a terrible son. I told him he was allowed to be a son and a husband at the same time. That his parents being disappointed for one Christmas did not erase everything he had ever done for them. He nodded, but I could tell the guilt was still lodged in his chest. Late in the afternoon, we went kayaking because the resort had this little rental stand right by the water. It was supposed to be relaxing, and parts of it were. The water was calm, the sky was that soft color it gets before sunset, and for a while it was just us and the sound of the paddles. When we got back to the dock and I finally picked up my phone again, I saw a bunch of missed calls and a flood of messages. Some were from his brother, some from his parents, but the ones that froze my blood were from our neighbor. She had texted in the early afternoon asking if we were maybe playing a prank or if someone else had permission to be at the house. Then she sent another message about hearing loud music coming from inside our place, way louder than anything she had ever heard from us. Then there were messages about seeing people going in and out of our front door with foil-covered trays and bottles. She said she had walked over and rung the bell, but nobody answered, even though she could hear voices and laughter. The last message before we called her said, "I do not think this is right. I can call the police if you want. Let me know." I called her immediately. My hands were actually shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. She picked up on the first ring, sounding breathless and anxious. She told me there were definitely people inside our house, that she recognized some of my husband's relatives from previous years, but also saw faces she did not know. She had walked around the side of the house and saw through the gap in our curtains that our living room was full of people. My brother-in-law was right in the middle of it, holding a drink and talking loudly like he was the host. She said they had music playing and that our front yard already had paper cups and napkins scattered on it. I felt this hot, shaky rage bloom in my chest. It was one thing for his brother to push us, guilt trip us, assume things about our time and energy. It was another thing entirely for him to be inside our locked house when we were out of state. I asked our neighbor if she could record a short video for us, just enough to show what was happening, because I had a bad feeling this was going to get worse before it got better. She agreed, whispered that she would walk back over and hold her phone up by the side window where the curtain never fully closes. A few minutes later, she sent us a video. In the video, my living room did not look like my living room. It looked like some stranger's house after a Christmas party I had not even been invited to. The tree I had dragged in and decorated was in the corner with people leaning on it like it was a coat rack. The lights crooked and one ornament I loved hanging by a thread. There were shoes all over my rug and people stepping around the coffee table that was covered in food. Not on plates, just in clumps and crumbs right next to the scented candles and the little fake pine centerpiece I had put out. Someone had dumped drinks so close to the wrapped gifts under the tree that I could see dark, damp spots on the paper. My brother-in-law was in the center of the frame, holding a drink and talking loudly like he was hosting Christmas at his place. I heard him shout something about making it happen no matter what, and people cheered. I called him. My husband said nothing, just watched my face as the phone rang. My brother-in-law answered on the third ring with a sharp, "Where are you?" Like I was the one out of line. The music and noise behind him were so loud I had to raise my voice just to be heard. I asked him, very clearly, why there were people inside my house when we were out of town. He had the nerve to sound annoyed, like I was interrupting something fun. He said, "Well, someone had to step up. Family needed a place, and you two bailed, so here we are." I asked him how he even got into the house. Because we had changed our alarm code and taken our keys. That is when he casually dropped the detail that made my stomach drop. He said he went to our parents' house that morning, told them he needed the spare key for emergencies, and so he could keep Christmas from falling apart, and our father-in-law gave it to him. Not only that, our father-in-law also gave him the old alarm code we used to have, because apparently it was written down somewhere just in case. When my brother-in-law tried the old code and realized it did not work, the alarm started blaring, and according to him, our father-in-law called the alarm company, because the contract was still in his name from when he owned the house, and convinced them to shut it off and mark it as a false alarm. After that, he called a handyman he found through a local listing. Not even a real locksmith, just one of those guys who does quick jobs for cash and does not ask a lot of questions. He told him to come switch out the front door lock because he thought it would be easier to hand out new keys to whoever he wanted and harder for us to just show up and walk in if we changed our minds. One of those guys who does quick jobs for cash, he said, like he was talking about someone fixing a squeaky hinge instead of someone breaking into our house with a drill and new hardware. I could not speak for a second. I just stood there, phone pressed to my ear, eyes burning, listening to the sound of people laughing in my home, while he acted like this was no big deal. My husband's face had gone pale. When I found my voice again, I told my brother-in-law this was not okay. I told him he did not have permission to be there, that changing the locks on someone else's house and throwing a party inside it while they were out of state was not some cute family solution. It was a crime. He rolled his eyes. I could hear it in his voice. He said, "Relax. It is one day. We will clean up. You are being intense." That word, intense, made me want to throw my phone into the pool. I told him to get everyone out of my house. He said he would wrap it up soon, and then hung up on me. For a few seconds after the call ended, everything felt fuzzy. The resort around me sounded far away, like I was underwater. My husband kept asking, "What did he say? What did he say?" And I just kept shaking my head. When I finally told him that his father had given his brother our key and the old alarm code, that his brother had physically changed our lock to get inside, I watched the hurt move across his face like a shadow. He sat down heavily on the edge of the bed and put his hands on his head. He kept repeating, he had no right. But I could tell he felt torn in about 5 different directions. We talked about calling the police right then, from the resort, but part of me hesitated. I was scared and I was furious, but I also knew that if we called the police while his parents were there, it would turn into an even bigger explosion. I am not saying that is a good reason. I am just being honest about what was going through my mind. I told our neighbor to keep recording anything she safely could and to call the authorities if things got out of control, like if she saw strangers coming and going, or if the noise got too insane. She said she would keep an eye on it. I trusted her more than I trusted half of my husband's relatives at that point. We spent that night at the resort in this weird limbo. The room was quiet, the bed was soft, but my brain would not shut up. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured someone knocking over the framed photo of our wedding, or some random cousin going through our drawers, looking for napkins and finding things that were none of their business. I imagined spills on the rug that would never come out, greasy finger marks on the walls, someone leaving the back door unlocked. My husband kept getting up and sitting back down, walking to the balcony and then coming back inside. At one point he said, "We should never have left." And for a second I felt like he was blaming me, even though I knew he was just speaking from panic. We checked flights and managed to get on an early one back on December 26th. The day after Christmas. I barely slept. At dawn, we checked out, dragged our suitcases through the quiet lobby, and headed to the airport. The whole trip back, from the shuttle to the plane to the ride from the airport to our street, felt like moving through a bad dream you keep hoping you will wake up from. My husband barely spoke. I scrolled through the videos our neighbor had sent. One of them showed the end of the night. People stumbling out of our front door, carrying containers of leftovers that had probably started as my food from last year and somehow became theirs. When our ride dropped us off in front of our house, the first thing I noticed was the trash. Empty cups, plates, napkins, a piece of foil that had blown into the bushes. There were tire tracks on the strip of grass by the driveway, like someone had decided parking on our front yard was an option. My stomach tightened. We walked up to the front door, and my husband tried his key. It did not even go in all the way. The lock had been replaced with some cheap, shiny thing that did not match our hardware. It felt surreal standing on my own porch, unable to open my own door. We went around the side of the house to the gate that leads to the backyard and garage. That lock, thankfully, was still ours. We let ourselves into the backyard, then into the house through the door that connects to the garage, which still had the old lock, because of course my brother-in-law had only bothered to change the front door like an amateur trying to look important, instead of actually securing anything. The second I stepped into the kitchen, I knew it was worse than I had imagined. There were sticky spots on the floor where something had spilled and dried. The counters were cluttered with cups. bottles, and crumpled napkins. The sink was piled high with dishes I did not recognize. The smell of stale food and alcohol hit me like a wall. I walked into the living room and stopped. It looked like a stranger's party had exploded and then half cleaned itself up. The couch cushions were out of place and stained in a couple of spots. The throw blanket I keep folded over the back was crumpled on the floor with a shoe print on it. Our coffee table had rings from cups all over it, along with a few dried smears of something I did not even want to identify. The rug had a dark blotch near the edge where the group must have dropped something. A framed photo of my husband with his grandmother, the one who passed away a few years ago, was lying face down on the floor with a crack running across the glass. I took out my phone and started taking pictures. Every room, every stain, every misplaced item. I felt detached in that moment, like I had stepped out of my own body and was watching someone else document the damage. My husband had gone quiet. He walked to the shelf where he keeps a couple of little things that belong to his mom. Small pieces that do not mean much to anyone else but mean everything to him. One of them, a little ceramic trinket dish, was chipped on the edge. He just stood there staring at it, his hands hanging by his sides. We checked the rest of the house. The bathroom had damp towels on the floor and used soap wrappers in the sink. One of the bedroom doors was open when we always keep it closed. I did not even need to look closely to see that someone had sat on our bed. There was an imprint still on the blanket. That felt like the most invasive part to me, even more than the sticky floors and broken frame. It is one thing to spill a drink in someone's living room. It is another to sit on their bed in their absence like you own the place. By the time we finished walking through, my hands were shaking from a mix of anger and disbelief. My husband kept saying, "He had no right," under his breath, as if repeating it would make it less true that it had already happened. I told him I was calling the police. For once, he did not argue. He just nodded. When I called the non-emergency line and explained what had happened, the woman on the phone was quiet for a second. I could tell she was trying to sort out whether this was a simple dispute or something more serious. I told her someone had used a key that did not belong to them, changed our lock without our consent, and thrown a party inside our home while we were out of state. I also told her I had video proof from our neighbor and a string of messages showing that we had repeatedly said we would not be hosting. She said officers would come by to document everything. They arrived about an hour later, 2 of them, polite, but all business. They asked for identification and proof that we lived there. We showed them our IDs and the paperwork we keep in a folder in the drawer by the phone. I walked them through the house, pointing out the changed lock, the damage, the things that were out of place. I showed them the videos on my phone and the screenshots of messages where my brother-in-law bragged about making Christmas happen at our place, even after we had said no. I could tell from their faces that they had seen a lot worse, but I could also tell they took it seriously. One of the officers asked if we knew exactly who had changed the lock. I told him what my brother-in-law had said on the phone about hiring a handyman from an online listing. He nodded and wrote that down. He said they might be able to track that person down too, because changing a lock on a house you do not own, without any documentation, is not something reputable people usually do. They took photos of their own, made notes, and explained that this would be filed as an unlawful entry and possibly criminal mischief depending on the damage assessment. Hearing those words made something in me unclench. It was not just me being intense. This was real. Later that day, they went to talk to my brother-in-law. I know because my phone started buzzing with messages from relatives. Someone had seen the police at his place and decided it was their duty to let everyone know. The story spread fast, but like most family gossip, it spread in fragments. By the time it reached some of my husband's cousins, the version floating around was that I had called the cops on a family gathering. Because I was bitter, we had not been able to go. That is the thing about boundaries in families like this. The second you enforce one, someone will call you cruel or dramatic. That night, my father-in-law called. I almost did not pick up, but I knew avoiding them would just make things worse. I put the call on speaker so my husband could hear. His father's voice came through tight and angry. He wanted to know how we could humiliate his son like this, how we could drag the law into a family situation, how we could let his boy spend time in a holding cell on Christmas. I let him talk for a while. I let him say all the things I had expected him to say. Then I asked him a simple question. I asked him if he remembered handing over our spare key and our old alarm code that morning. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then he said he had only done that because he thought we would come to our senses and come home when we realized how much it meant to everyone. He said he never imagined we would make it a crime. I told him it already was a crime the second someone stepped into our house without our consent and changed our lock. I told him I understood that he wanted his family together, that I knew he was scared about his health and wanted memories. But that did not give him or anyone else the right to decide that our home was just some community hall they could unlock whenever they felt like it. His breathing sounded heavier through the phone. He said he did not want to talk about it anymore and hung up. The days that followed were a blur of cleaning and calls. My husband and I spent hours scrubbing, vacuuming, picking up trash, washing sheets, and trying to get the smell of stale alcohol out of the house. We had to pay someone to professionally clean the couch and the rug. We replaced the broken picture frame and bought new locks for every exterior door. This time from a professional company with documentation, not some person found through a casual listing. Every time the bill came in, it reminded me that on top of everything else, this little stunt had cost us real money. Family messages rolled in like waves. Some were openly hostile. One aunt said we should be ashamed of ourselves, that you do not send family to jail. A cousin I had always been neutral with told me I was cold for choosing a vacation and police reports over one night of chaos. Others were more subtle but still manipulative. Things like, your mother-in-law has been crying nonstop, or your father-in-law's heart is not strong. This stress could really hurt him. Nobody seemed interested in the fact that my own heart had been racing nonstop since I watched that video of my living room full of people I had not invited. A few relatives, though, reached out quietly with a different tone. One of my husband's younger cousins texted me late one night to say she understood why we did what we did, and that she had seen how my brother-in-law treated me in the past. She apologized for not speaking up more. Another relative said gently that while they wished it had not gotten to this point, they also knew that his brother had been out of line for a long time. Those messages did not erase the hurt, but they reminded me I was not completely insane. The legal part moved slower, like it always does, but he did end up being taken down to the station that first night and spending several hours in a holding cell while they processed everything. My brother-in-law ended up facing charges related to unlawful entry and property damage, and the officers told us later that they had tracked down the handyman through the number in his phone. The guy admitted he had never asked for proof that my brother-in-law actually lived there and got a warning and a note on his record. But that was it for him. He did not go to prison or anything dramatic like that. But there were hearings, there were lawyers, and there were consequences. He had to pay restitution for part of the damage, which still did not cover everything, but it was something. The court put in place a formal no-contact order as part of the agreement in his case, basically a condition that he stay away from our house and not contact us directly for a set period of time while he was on probation. When that order came through, I sat at the table holding the paper, feeling a mix of vindication and sadness. I never wanted my life to include phrases like no contact order and trespass, but there it was in black and white. My husband struggled. I will not sugarcoat that part. He was angry at his brother and hurt by his father, but he was also grieving the version of his family he thought he had. He started seeing a therapist, which I honestly think saved us. He needed a place to say out loud that he felt like a bad son and a good husband at the same time, and did not know how to live with that. The therapist told him something that stuck with me when he shared it later. She said, "Loyalty without boundaries is just self-destruction in slow motion." I wrote that down on a sticky note and put it inside the cabinet door by the sink where I see it when I reach for glasses. The first time we saw his parents in person after everything, months had passed. We met them in a neutral place, a little restaurant halfway between our town and theirs. There were no hugs. My mother-in-law looked tired. My father-in-law looked older than I remembered. We all ordered food none of us really tasted. The conversation was stiff. At one point, my father-in-law said he still did not agree with what we did, but he also did not want to lose his son over one incident. I told him it was not just one incident. It was years of smaller incidents that had built up to this, years of boundaries ignored and comments brushed off. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I just said it. He did not apologize. Not really. He said he was sorry things had gotten so out of hand, like the situation had grown legs and ran off on its own. But he did admit, in a low voice, that he should not have handed over our key and code without calling us first. That was the closest thing to accountability I was going to get from him, and I knew it. We left that lunch with this weird fragile truce. We were not close, but we were not full enemies either. It was like living in a house where one room had burned and been rebuilt, but you still smelled smoke when it rained. As for my brother-in-law, he disappeared from our lives almost completely. The order from the court meant we did not see him at family gatherings, not that we were going to many anyway. He started hosting his own events in other places, or so I heard. People told us the attendance was not great. Turns out when you get a reputation for ignoring people's boundaries and involving the law, some folks decide not to risk their own peace. I will not lie and say I did not feel a petty satisfaction picturing him in a half-empty living room, holding a drink and trying to pretend he was still the king of family Christmases. The next Christmas season, the one after everything happened, crept up on us quietly. Stores put out decorations again, kids on our street started talking about breaks from school, and neighbors hung lights along their roofs. For the first time in years, my chest did not tighten when I saw a display of platters and napkin rings. My husband and I talked about what we wanted to do, and for once, the answer was not automatically figure out the family schedule. We decided to have a small Christmas dinner at home. Not a big event. Not a production. Just us and a handful of people who actually respected us. We invited a couple of friends, my sister, and one of his cousins, the one who had quietly supported us. That was it. 6 people total. I cooked, but I cooked because I wanted to, not because I felt like I was auditioning for a role. I did not make a giant spread. I made a simple main dish, some sides I knew how to do in my sleep, and a dessert that came out of the oven right as people walked in. When our guests offered to help set the table, I said yes. When they got up to bring their plates to the sink after eating, they actually rinsed them. At the end of the night, my kitchen was not spotless. But it was not a disaster either. I went to bed tired in a normal way, not drained to the bone. At one point during the evening, someone made a joke about big family gatherings, and everyone laughed in that knowing way people do when they have seen too much. My husband caught my eye across the room and gave me this small, grateful smile. Later, when we were stacking leftovers in the fridge, he hugged me from behind and said, "I am glad we did not give in." I believed him. I believed myself too. We still hear things, of course. Families like this do not stop talking just because you set a boundary. Every once in a while, some story about his brother's latest stunt makes its way to us, filtered through a cousin or an aunt. Apparently, he spent one Christmas mostly alone after people bailed last minute. Apparently, he complained loudly that some people cannot take a joke, like breaking into someone's house with a locksmith is just a playful prank. I used to want to correct every version of the story, to make sure everyone knew what really happened. Now I just let it float past me most of the time. The people who want to know the truth already do. The rest are not my responsibility. Every now and then, I still notice the tiny scratch on the coffee table, or the faint shadow on the rug where the stain never fully disappeared, and a little flash of anger flares up. But then I remember the feeling of my own key turning smoothly in the lock that we chose and paid for, the one nobody else has a copy of. I remember our small, quiet dinner with people who said thank you without making backhanded comments. I remember standing in my own kitchen after everyone left, looking around at the dishes and feeling tired but not resentful. So now, when Christmas rolls around and people start casually suggesting where we should host this or that, I smile and say we already have plans, even if those plans are just the 2 of us and a quiet night at home. I do not explain. I do not justify. I am done auditioning for the role of perfect hostess in a show I never agreed to star in. My living room still remembers the nights it was taken over without my consent, but it also remembers the night it was filled with the right number of people, the right kind of laughter, and the kind of peace you only notice once you have lived without it for a long time. One day, I finally decided to talk to my own family about everything, which I had been putting off because I did not want to hear their commentary either. My side of the family is smaller and a little less dramatic, but they still have their own ideas about what daughters and sisters should do. My sister came over one afternoon on her day off, and we sat at my kitchen table with a plate of cookies between us that we mostly just picked apart. She had heard whispers about the incident from a cousin of my husband who worked with a friend of hers, because of course the story traveled in the most indirect way possible. She wanted to know what actually happened. I told her. All of it. I watched her face shift from confusion to anger, to that protective older sibling look I had not seen since we were teenagers, and someone made fun of me at the mall. When I told her about the lock being changed, she slammed her hand on the table hard enough to rattle the plate and said, "If anyone did that to my place, I would have called the police too. Honestly, you were nicer than I would have been." It felt almost absurd how soothing that sentence was. She is not perfect either. She has said some things over the years that still sting, but in that moment she was on my side without qualification. No, but you could have handled it differently. No, maybe he just got carried away. He was wrong. My mother, on the other hand, reacted exactly how I expected, and exactly how I did not need. When I told her, over the phone because I did not have the energy to do it in person, she made a little clucking sound and said, "You know how families are. Sometimes we do things we should not do. But at the end of the day, he is still your husband's brother." She asked if there was any way to let it go now that it is over. like we were talking about a forgotten birthday card, and not someone getting into my house behind my back. I did not yell at her. I just let her talk until she ran out of phrases about forgiveness and togetherness. And then I told her, as calmly as I could, that I was not holding on to a grudge for fun. I was holding on to a boundary so that this specific thing would never happen to me again. She went quiet for a second, then changed the subject to something safe, like the weather. It stung, but it also clarified something for me. Sometimes the people who love you do not know how to support you when you stop doing the thing that keeps everyone comfortable. One of the strangest parts of all of this is that I ended up getting closer to our neighbor than to half of my in-laws. After everything happened, I baked her a cake as a thank you, which is funny considering how traumatized I was by cooking for people for a while. I walked it over one Saturday afternoon, still warm in the pan, and when she opened the door, she laughed and said, "If this is a bribe not to tell anyone else what I saw, you are too late. I already told at least 3 people." Then she stepped aside and invited me in like we had been friends for years instead of just waving at each other over trash cans. We sat in her kitchen, which somehow managed to feel cozy and lived in instead of cluttered, and she told me exactly what that day had looked like from her window. She described the cars showing up, the stream of people going in and out, the way my brother-in-law had stood on my porch gesturing like a game show host welcoming contestants. She told me that when she realized we really were out of town and not just hiding inside with the lights off, she felt this protective anger on my behalf that surprised even her. "There is a difference between family being loud and family being entitled," she said, cutting herself a slice of cake. "They crossed that line so fast, they left skid marks." I did not realize how badly I needed someone who was not related to any of us to say that out loud until she did. Months later, when the court stuff was mostly settled and the order was in place, life did that annoying thing it does where it keeps going like nothing happened. I still had to get up and go to work, still had to argue with my husband about whose turn it was to clean the bathroom, still had to remember to pay the electric bill. On the surface, everything looked normal again. But underneath, some things had shifted in a way that did not shift back. I stopped automatically volunteering for things at work and with friends, which sounds small, but it was a big deal for me. I used to be the first one to say, "Oh, I can host," or "I will organize it," even when I was exhausted, because being needed felt safer than being honest. Now, if I do not want to do something, I try to just say that. My voice still shakes sometimes, but I say it. My husband and I also had to renegotiate what family time meant. Before, a lot of our visits with his parents happened at our house by default, because it was easier for them to come here than for us to go there. After everything with the key and the lock, I could not do that anymore. The first time his parents suggested coming over for a quick visit, my stomach clenched so hard I had to put the phone down. I told my husband I was not ready to have them in our house again yet, not until I could look at my father-in-law without picturing him handing over our key like it was a coupon. My husband did not love that conversation. He felt caught in the middle again, but he listened. We compromised by meeting them in public places for a while, parks and small restaurants, where nobody had the power to change the locks or invite extra people without someone noticing. We also made sure my father-in-law gave back the spare key he had kept on his ring, the one we thought he had taken off months earlier when we first talked about boundaries. And we had the alarm account finally moved into our names so there would not be any more surprises hiding in old paperwork. It was awkward sitting in those neutral spaces with people who had known my husband his whole life and still refused to fully admit they had done anything wrong. There were long silences, clumsy jokes, a lot of talk about traffic and television shows. But there were also tiny moments when I saw flashes of something more honest, like the time my mother-in-law squeezed my hand under the table and whispered that she had not known about the locksmith until after the fact, and that if she had been home, she would have stopped it. I do not know if that is true, but I like to think she meant it. I am allowed to hold that and the anger at the same time. The thing nobody really tells you about boundaries is that they do not fix the past. They do not magically make the people who hurt you turn into different people. They just change what happens next. They change who has access to you, who gets to hold your keys, literally and metaphorically. There are still days when I miss the idea of big, noisy Christmases with a house full of people and kids running around and adults arguing over nothing, where the worst complaint is that their uncle tells the same joke every year. Then I remember the sound of my own front door not opening to my key, and the echo of music blasting inside my house while I stood in another state on the phone with someone who thought I was overreacting. Whatever romantic fantasy I had about big family energy dies pretty quickly after that. Sometimes, late at night when my husband has already fallen asleep and the house is finally completely quiet, I walk down the hallway and just stand in the doorway of the living room for a minute. The lights are off, but I know every shape in that room by heart now. The couch we paid off in installments, the coffee table with its little scratch, the rug with its faint shadow of a stain, the framed photo we replaced after the glass cracked. It still feels a little like a scar, the whole experience, something that healed but left a mark you can trace with your fingers. But it also feels like proof that I did not just let it happen and then pretend it was fine. I did something. I said no. I called it what it was. I chose my own sanity, even when people called me dramatic for it. If you walked into my house now on any random day, you would not see anything extraordinary. You would see shoes by the door, a couple of mugs on the coffee table, maybe a laundry basket half folded on the couch because I got distracted halfway through. You would not see the fight, or the court forms, or the messages from relatives, or the hours I spent scrubbing other people's footprints out of my carpet. But I see it. I carry it. And weirdly enough, that makes me feel safer, not more afraid. I know where my line is now. I know what it looks like when someone tries to cross it. I know what it feels like to hold it, even when my voice shakes, even when my hands are still smelling faintly of dish soap. So when the next Christmas season rolled around and a distant cousin dropped a casual comment in the group chat about how nothing beats the whole clan piled into Angela's house, I watched my phone light up on the counter and just let the message sit there. I did not respond with a nervous laugh or a half joke about needing to think about it. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, finished what I was doing, and then typed out a simple answer. We are keeping things small at our place from now on, but hope you all have a good time wherever you celebrate. No explanation, no apology. Someone else can volunteer their living room to be the background of a story like mine if they want to. Mine has had enough. I set my phone down on the counter and went back to my evening like it was any other night.